Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always, and thank you for joining me for the first of two end of season episodes, specials, whatever you want to call them. This first one focusing more on the Supercars Championship. Just got back from Adelaide and the season finale at the Adelaide 500 earlier in the week. So, going to wrap that one up for you. Lot to talk about from there, being Holden's final race in Australia as well, and just in general, we won't see the Holden name in the Premier Touring Car category. And also, many other things as well. First win for Brock Feeney in the championship. What does the future look like moving to Gen 3? And then just, kind of a summary of the year in general for the championship. It's been a dominant one for Shane van Gisbergen and the Red Bull Ampol Racing team. And then, of course, later at a later date I'll go do my F1 season review as well, where as you know from the past, I don't really run off a script or anything like that. It's just more an informal chat of how the season has gone and what's my thoughts on it too. So it's really nice, and of course just able to look back on it now without all the emotion that is attached to when you're kind of watching it during the year, because it has been a bit of a tricky year in general, and in F1 as well, a lot going on, and not necessarily the same as what happened last year with the controversial season finale. So without further ado, the Supercars Championship. So, first of all, thank you, Adelaide. Thank you to the Labor government as well. Peter Malinauskas, one of his bold promises in the state election this year in South Australia was to resurrect the Adelaide 500. I don't know what else he's promised as well. Hopefully there's other things beyond just a motor race to be elected over. But yes, 4 exhilarating days. It's seen some of the best racing this year as well, I've got to say. And it's not just because I'm biased because I was there and got to see it firsthand, but really, this is the first time all year I've seen anyone actually give some biff and barge to Van Gisbergen. So, good on Chaz Mostert for doing that in the Saturday race, and he avoided a penalty as well. But an estimated crowd of 258,200 people across the 4 days. It just shows, what an event this is, how special it is for, fans of motorsport and just events in South Australia in general. So, the fact that it was canned in the first place seemed pretty silly. And yes, not even the blistering heat and my sunburnt skin at the time could stop me from enjoying this event. I had a great view as well. I was sitting in the hairpin grandstand at the final corner, so you get that really good view from the run into turn 13, of course, getting on the brakes into the final corner, which we saw some mistakes at, and then coming out onto the pit straight and blasting down towards the opening sequence of corners, the famous centre chicane, of course, from the days F1 used to be there. Before we go on track, talking about some of the off-track stuff as well. Great names in the music industry as well. Not that I got to see all of them. I stuck around for the Killers on Sunday night, which was really enjoyable. But yeah, if you're fans of like Jimmy Barnes, Icehouse, Noiseworks, there was Amy Shark, Lime Cordial, who was big in the indie music scene, Baker Boy as well. So some real big names, and they've already announced for next year, even though it's, 12 months away, Robbie Williams will be headlining the post-race concert on the Sunday night. So if you're fans of entertainment and Robbie, you've got to be there, I guess. So yeah, it was a really well put together event. I loved the fans. Not, like spectator fans, but those giant fans with like water spraying from them as well. It was just what you needed, because yeah, it was quite hot. I did feel like I was going to pass out at one point because of heat exhaustion. I'm like, no, must make a reel for Instagram. Okay, I need to go get water. And silly of me not, taking sunscreen on the first day. I thought, my skin was more tolerant, but, perhaps the more I have lived in Melbourne through winters and having my skin covered, the more kind of fairer it's gotten. So yeah, I came back with a very, very, dark tone on my skin at the end of it. But yeah, overall really good, great showcasing of South Australian food and drink and all that sort of stuff as well, which is really important. So, they just did such a great job with the event. So hats off to them for that. Into the racing now, I guess there was a lot of emotion given that it was the final race of the season. The championship has already been decided, and the team's championship as well. There was second up for grabs between Chas Mostert and Cameron Waters, which Waters ended up taking in the end, even though I thought it was Mostert. But anyway, the points don't lie. And also it was the final race for Holden as well in the championship. So after decades of the Holden versus Ford rivalry, and of course, in 2020, it was announced that the Holden nameplate would be scrapped from these shores, not only in just production. Well, they haven't really produced anything anyway in recent times, but, from motorsport as well, it will disappear. They will still have those Commodore ZBs racing around in Super 2 next year, and whatever will pass on to Super 3. But as far as the Premier Supercars category is concerned, we're looking forward to Gen 3 now, which will have the the next Gen Ford Mustang, which looks stunning, by the way. It was great to see those Gen 3 laps as well there, and the new iteration of the Mustang just looks very mean. I love it more than the Camaro. So, come out early and say I'm on the Ford side, not that I really drew allegiances in the past. It was more so, which team was I backing, and Walkinshaw and Andretti United, of course, switching over, being a long time Holden and GM team to going over to the Ford side next year. So it was poignant too that they did a Holden tribute cruise on Saturday morning, so fans were able to register their interest to partake, where they get to drive their Holden car from the old manufacturing plant in Elizabeth in north of Adelaide to the Parklands circuit. They were joined by, of course, 7-time Bathurst champion Craig Lowndes in doing that. So, that was great. Whoever got to take part in that. Unfortunately, I didn't see it. I didn't want to get up too early for that. But then, of course, we go into the racing and, wow, emphatic 1-2 finish for the Walkinshaw Andretti United team, which has never happened at Adelaide before. They've been so successful in the past when you look at when they were the Holden racing team, and this was one of the stats I think that was up for grabs. Bragging rights for Holden were up for grabs by Sunday, is that 188 wins for Red Bull Ampol Racing since they took over the HRT moniker, and then 187 is what Walkinshaw achieved by Saturday afternoon. So, could they end Holden's time in Australian touring cars with equal on wins, or was the Triple Eight and Red Bull going to get one up on their old HRT? So that was interesting the way it turned out, and of course, with Brock Feeney's maiden win in Supercars, it ended up being 189 wins to 187 on the Walkinshaw side. But 1-2 finish for Walkinshaw on the Saturday. Obviously I'm a big Chas Mostert fan, but then also for Nick Percat, who's a proud South Australian, one of the few drivers who really advocated for this event to come back. There was Scott Pye, Todd Hazelwood as well, Tim Slade. They were all rallying, when they did the public demonstrations and protests, if you'd like, to bring back the Adelaide 500. So for Percat, it's a special result as well to be up there on the podium. And yeah, 5th win of the year for Mostert too. So he started 7th in that one, kept his nose clean through the race. Unfortunately for Van Gisbergen and then Cam Waters, who was on pole for this one via the top 10 shootout, there was quite a bit of trouble. I mean, it was probably one of the worst races SVG's had all season. He ended up in the barriers twice at turn 11 and then ended up limping home in 20th at the end of the day. There was a point where in the pit stops they had to get the electric saw out to shave off some of the bodywork under one of his wheel guards or whatever. So, and then, like I said earlier, he was punted off at turn 6 by Mostert on one of the safety car restarts too. So really getting bullied around was Van Gisbergen, getting a serve of his own medicine, I think, after the hell he's put everyone through this season, his rivals that is. But, it was all laughed off at the end of the day because it didn't really matter for him. And then, yeah, of course, the double stack as well. Oh no, the double stack happened in race 34, which we'll talk about later. Waters having a healthy battle for the podium with, or for the win at that point with Pye, of course, and then Pye ended up going wide at turn 13, getting a run on the Monster Energy Mustang, and this is where I was caught off guard a little bit. I was like, oh, is something going to happen? I've got my camera ready, and then, I didn't quite get a clear picture of it, but I did get enough to show that Pye ended up with a wheel in the dirt and kicked up a bunch of dirt in the air while chasing Waters, but didn't end up getting any kind of move done. And of course, then, one of them ended up in the turn 11 barrier. Waters ended up getting a penalty too for causing a spin for Todd Hazelwood at turn 5, and this was all because of him trying to get a move on Macaulay Jones at turn 4. So Hazelwood ended up in a spin and collected Will Brown, so that gave him a drive-through penalty, did Waters, and then all because of this, it saw Mostert up to the front of the field and having a chance to take extra fuel in his second stop meant that he didn't really have to worry about that later on as other people did. And for Percat as well, starting down in 20th, was able to come up and finish in second, but that wasn't without pressure from James Courtney too, so the highest placed Tickford car in the end of race 33, of course, and Courtney himself, a former Adelaide 500 winner with HRT back in the day too. So, they couldn't really do the formation finish because Courtney was right behind them at the end of the day. But it made for a really nice photo when they did come around on the cool down lap, both Mostert and Percat together. So good result for those guys. Maybe a bit of confidence as well going into next year for Percat. It's not been the most easiest season for him, of course. The expectation was that he'll come to a team like Walkinshaw and Andretti United and he'll be at the front of the field, but given that many regard him as an alpha driver, and having him and Mostert together would be like having a De Pasquale and Davison, or Feeney and Van Gisbergen, or a Van Gisbergen Win Cup last year, but unfortunately it's been more of a challenge for Percat, so hopefully it will set him up for next year. Of course, driving a Ford for the first time too. He's been a Holden driver from his from the start of his career. Of course, he won the Bathurst 1000 with Garth Tander, who as well has decided to defect next year, deciding not to take up and renew his co-driving agreement with the Red Bull team, and he's won 2 more Bathursts with Shane Van Gisbergen, so he's going over to Grove Racing next year, the Penrite team, so that will be an interesting one to see next year when we do have 2 Enduros. Thankfully, you got the Sandown 500 preceding the Bathurst 1000, so I think that experience from Tander will be quite interesting. So that's going to make the co-driver market rather interesting, because there is a primo seat at 888 up for grabs now. Heading into Sunday for race 34, of course, this was the final one at the end, and quite fitting, isn't it, that a driver with Brock in his name wins the final race for Holden. So, of course, the legend Peter Brock, of course, being synonymous with the Holden brand, but 20-year-old Feeney, who took over the 88 car from Jamie Whincup, the 7-time champion, and of course Whincup moving over to the team owner role and team boss role this year. And not much is really, like, I feel like I haven't said enough about Feeney as I should have this season, because he's just been quietly chipping away and achieving, solid results. He hasn't really, done anything super flash. Like, he's had 2 podiums before this win in Adelaide. He was on the podium early in the season there in Symmons Plains in Tassie, and then of course during the Sandown Super Sprint weekend as well, he ended up 3rd in that final race. But apart from the crash that he was caught up in at Surfers last time out, the second race of the Gold Coast 500, he hasn't finished below like 11th. Actually, no, 14th is his worst result. So he's been consistently in the top 15, and finishing 6th in the standings overall is an achievement for someone, so young, stepping into the big shoes of Whincup. And, when you have a teammate like Van Gisbergen who's done so well this season as well, the benchmark is always going to be how good are you versus your teammate. But I think for Feeney, it's been irrelevant this season, and when you look at them as a combination, they've well and truly outclassed, their closest rival in the team's championship, and that's Dick Johnson Racing. So they did really well there. But Feeney in that race, wow, like to hold off Mostert as well for not just, a small amount of time, but for quite a few laps towards the end of the race was amazing. Like, there were so many times where I'm like, oh, Chaz has got his lights on. He's going to send it down the inside at 14, or coming out of turn 8 or into turn 9, he's going to make the move. It just didn't happen. And Feeney just seemed unflappable. So this is the kind of, thing you want to see from a young guy in a big team like that, where they don't succumb to pressure at the top of the field. So, whether we get to see him in more of a closer fight at the front next year, possibly for wins, do Red Bull have to employ some team orders and whatnot? I'd like to see him up against, driving up against his teammate, because Van Gisbergen is, known for being the intimidator in this category, and with good reason too. It's not like, he shouldn't be allowed to intimidate, because we're here to race. We're not here to just jump aside like some people do in the end. So good on him for holding off Mostert to take the win. Less than a second separated them. Feeney did qualify well. He started from the second row and was quite early into pit on lap 11. And then, that allowed him to benefit when there was a lap 22 safety car, which was due to Jake Kostecki finding the wall at turn 8, the infamous turn 8, of course. So that allowed Davison, who had also pitted early, and Feeney to vault to the front of the field. And, for the 2-time Bathurst winner in Davison to kind of be brushed aside after the restart at turn 9 by a rookie, just kind of said, yeah, this kid knows what he's doing, and, he doesn't really succumb to any pressure, even if it is a 2-time Bathurst winner. Then there was another crash, this time for Bryce Fullwood at turn 8, triggering another safety car, and this brought Feeney in for his final stop, but unfortunately this is where that double stack ended up happening for SVG, and that hurt him. And then, of course, he was found to have breached the safety car restart procedure, having overlapped Lee Holdsworth before the apex of the final corner. So this was a bit controversial, and he ended up with a drive-through penalty, though at the end it didn't really stop him from that epic burnout that he did on the main straight after the race. But yeah, with Mostert up from 5th in qualifying to being in contention for back-to-back wins this weekend, I really was conflicted. I was like, I really want Mostert to win, but then Feeney to take his first win is going to be special in what is Holden's last race for, Red Bull being the homologation Holden team. So, much like his predecessor Whincup as well, Feeney taking his first win in Supercars on the streets of Adelaide, like Jamie did back in 2006, of course, but that's when they were piloting the Ford Falcons. Rounding out the podium in that race was Anton De Pasquale, he did struggle despite starting on pole, but ended up third, so some kind of consolation for him. But Davison, just it was a comedy of errors really for DGR and Davison in the wall at turn 11, and yeah, they just didn't really have anything to celebrate at the end of the day. But yeah, Feeney, a winner. I would not have predicted that this year, given his progress and everything. I would have said easily next year might have been a better chance for him to do that. But at the end of the day, they're in the best car on the grid. They've got the best team as well. So how couldn't any driver, flourish in that environment? Of course, they've got to have some talent as well, of course. So, and Feeney is beyond talented, as we know. So, yeah, that was Adelaide. The SVG burnout was quite epic, as you saw. He ended up taking off one of his shoes or his race boots and sticking it under the throttle. Just, kept the tyres shredding while he stood on top of the roof and celebrated. So that was quite interesting. And you wouldn't expect any less from Shane because of the season he's had. 21 wins. Setting that record as well, like Verstappen did in F1 this year. 21 wins out of 34 races. It is incredible. And, pole positions that went the way of Waters with 10 for the season, and he was able to chalk that up with Adelaide on Saturday to get it. And then I think, Mostert behind with, I thought it was 5 wins, but 4 wins for Mostert this year. The closest in terms of... No, it is 5 wins, so someone's obviously mucked up somewhere. So, that is such a dominant year that he's had. Like, what do you do moving forward? I think the onus is on everyone else to try and step it up next year, and I've said this time and time again. When you look at Mostert, who finished third in the championship behind Cam Waters, I think, the peaks were there, but then so were the troughs as well, sadly. So, like, you look at Tassie, unfortunately, Perth, they were really kind of dismal rounds to be finishing down in 23rd and 22nd, while Van Gisbergen has just had, he's either won races or finished on the podium or has had a bad day, but there's more of the former than there is of the latter. And then same for Waters, who's been consistent with finishing on the podium and everything, and consistent with being quick, but you also then have those races where you're down in 18th and down in 21st, and they just don't have the pace. And then there's the races where they're in contention to win, but then when it comes to defending, they just kind of jump out of the way, and that's it. So we have to see less of that hopefully next year, and more kind of aggression like we saw from Mostert in the final, or in race 33 against Van Gisbergen. Just don't be afraid to get the elbows out, because Van Gisbergen's going to show no quarter, so why should you? And I'm not saying it like in a way where I know everything, yada yada yada. It's just from a spectator's point of view, it is disappointing when one person does run away with it, but he's a generational talent. He is like a Scott McLaughlin kind of thing. So who's going to step it up to take it to them next time? We'll just have to wait and see. It's also like fitting as well to say a little bit about Gen 2, given that, this was the last race for Gen 2 as well, when with the Camaro and the new Mustang coming in next year. Gen 2 just kind of was a bit of a damp squib, really, when you look at the way it was introduced as well. It was introduced back in 2017, and it was meant to attract new manufacturers with the addition of the two-door, the coupe body type, and then, of course, at one point it was like, if you want to have a turbo turbocharged 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder engine, you could do that. And yeah, remember Holden were actually developing a V6 turbo in their Sandman concept for supercars, but there was no change in the field when that regulation package came in to play in 2018. We saw the switch to the ZB Commodore, which had the more kind of hatchback style. When I mean hatchback, it's not a conventional boot. It kind of lifts the rear window. You know what I'm talking about, if you know your cars or whatever. So, that was interesting, even though Scott McLaughlin in the old Falcon FGX won the championship that year. And then 2019, it was things really heated up when Ford brought the Mustang over, and of course Mustang being a two-door coupe, trying to fit it to the Gen 2 chassis didn't quite work, so it looked a bit interesting, that one. Of course, it was stretched over, so like it had a higher roof and everything, but that wasn't really the controversial part, because that was when, the whole parity debate kicked off after Scotty McLaughlin blitzed the field in Adelaide. So, it just kind of left a bad taste in everyone's mouth, unless you're a one-eyed Holden supporter like Mark Scaife. It just left a bad taste in everyone's mouth that, we had to get all these parity adjustments done to, get it all worked out. I mean, even though the Mustang was quick, it was predominantly McLaughlin who was winning, and that was evident later on when, even in 2019, 2020, after those parity adjustments, McLaughlin was still the best driver and winning the most races and everything. So, is that going to be the same in 23 when, perhaps the Mustang rolls out and is the quickest, and then you have to dial back the aero changes and the parity and everything, given the fact that we're racing with two different engines and two different, outputs on the engine as well. Like, horsepower wise, they're meant to be similar, but like the displacements are different between them. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's with all the discontent this year towards Gen 3 and, the whole paddle shift versus stick shift debate, and how they eventually stuck with the sequential shift. Parts has been an issue to source, and the entire cost has kind of been blown out of proportion as well. And Gen 3 was supposed to be a more cost-effective formula, less dependent on aero and, more raceable in terms of wheel-to-wheel racing and not having the aero wash problems that they did have with the Gen 2 cars. It's like, well, we'll kind of have to wait and see now how it all pans out. At the moment, it's hard to be optimistic, but, I'm sure when we get to Newcastle next year, or even after Newcastle, when we've got tracks that are more like racetracks, the conventional racetracks, we might see some good racing. But yeah, the Gen 3 formula will suit drivers like Van Gisbergen pretty well, so it's going to take a lot of beating from his rivals to have him be stopped in 2023 as well. Early days, I'm going to put my money on Shane to win next year's championship, because unless something goes horribly wrong, or if someone steps it up, I don't see much changing in terms of the pecking order as well. So it'll be interesting to see, who's got the pressure on them and who doesn't as well. Notable shout outs as well, I guess, you can say a great effort for the likes of Feeney, but then the Penrite racing team, Grove Racing, they've done really well this year. David Reynolds in 8th, of course, with some podiums to his name, and Lee Holdsworth also getting on the podium, who has retired at the end of this season as well. So it was great to see him come back for one more year and have a decent year with Grove Racing. And they're a team that look like they're going to be serious, hopefully Team 18 as well, given how strong Scott Pye was at the end of the year in Adelaide, can come out and get some podiums next year. Same with Mark Winterbottom as well, who had a very consistent year. No DNFs against his name this year, so that's why he's up in 9th in the championship. Andre Heimgartner did well for Brad Jones Racing this year with some podiums to his name, so not looking too bad for the team from Albury. But yeah, really, I think for me, Tickford and DJR are the teams that need to step it up. They seem like they disappointed as a whole, even though we did see Waters up there second in the championship. But for the rest of them, Thomas Randall, of course, rookie season, didn't do such a bad job, and he had that pole position in Adelaide as well to his name, or front row start, whatever. But yeah, Jake Kostecki, not very impressive at all. So yeah, and James Courtney did a pretty solid job, I thought, but better could be done. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I can't say much more on it. James Golding, great job for him, of course. Coming in mid-year to race with Premier Racing. So hopefully going into a full season next year, he will do well. And yeah, bring on 2023 Newcastle. We're starting off with, and then got the return of the Sandown 500 before Bathurst. Some events, unfortunately, not going to be on the calendar, such as Winton, and New Zealand won't be there either, so that will be a bit sad given how well Van Gisbergen's doing at the moment, but we'll see if they can figure that out for 2024. But ultimately, yeah, it'll be, how does Gen 3 roll out? Will it be a success? Will it not be? I think a lot kind of depends on that, for the future of the category. It's a category that I really love, but it's also something that can frustrate the living daylights out of you as well. So, yeah. Thank you very much for tuning in as well. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about this championship for this year. Remember, I've got a F1 season review as well planned, hopefully coming soon before Christmas, so stay tuned for that. It could be as early as the week that this is released, or maybe even the week before Christmas, so we'll see how that goes. Other than that, just follow on the social medias. There's the Twitter account at Ethiopex Media. There is also a Linktree to all the other platforms I'm on with my articles for the Raw, and of course Instagram, where you can look at some of the pictures I took over the Adelaide 500 weekend. Until then, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys soon.